to another episode of Throwing It Back with Sean Farrell. I am Sean Farrell. God is great all the time. All the time, God is great. Jesus Christ died and he rose again. Let's go ahead and get into it, y'all. Okay, so in past videos I've talked about the Phoenix Suns drug scandal that hit around 87, 88. And drugs were very, very prevalent in the NBA around that time. There were a lot of NBA players who admitted to cocaine use. Just to name a few: Orlando Woolridge, Quentin Daly, Walter DeHavis, yes, Michael Ray Richardson, who got banned for life in the middle of the 1986 season. But there was a drug scandal that took place with the New York Knicks, okay? And really, if you watch The Last Dance, you remember when Michael Jordan came to the Bulls, okay? The Bulls at that time were known as what they called the, quote, traveling cocaine circus, okay? So really, you had the Knicks, the Suns, the Bulls, and probably not more other teams that were using cocaine. But it just so happened that the Suns and the Knicks, which I'm about to discuss in a minute, but you really didn't hear much about the Bulls. But yeah, so the Knicks gambling scandal, okay? It happened, this occurred around the 1981-82 season, okay? And so there was a book written by Brian Tuohy. Hold on, let me see it. All right. Okay. So there was a book written by Brian Tuohy called Larceny Games. Okay, yeah. Yeah. There was a book written by Brian Tuohy called Larceny Games: Sports Gambling, Game Fixing, and the FBI. Okay. So there was a Knicks drug scandal that took place during the 81-82 season. Okay. And according to Butch Beard, he said those early 80s Knicks teams, they were wild. Okay. Again, you had guys like Michael Ray Richardson, Ray Williams, Bernard King. So those early 80s Knicks teams were wild. Okay. So if you remember, back in 1980, okay, the Knicks, they had their first all-black team. Okay. In 1980, the New York Knicks had their first all-black team. And instead of referring to them as the New York Knickerbockers, right? People refer to them as the New York Nigger Bockers, okay? I kid you not. Ask Michael Ray Richardson. He was on that team. I think Michael Ray Richardson was on that team. They didn't call them the Knickerbockers. They called them the Nigger. Okay. Yeah, so Brian Tuohy's book, he writes about the Knicks, okay, in the 81-82 season. The Knicks were shaving points as a favor to their coke supplier, okay? This is according to the book that Brian Tuohy wrote. Um, there was an FBI informant, Tuohy writes in his book, that told the Bureau that the drug dealer increased his wagering from $300 per game, okay, to 10K during March of 1982, okay, and the vast majority were successful, okay, yeah. So, um, some who believed the Knicks were shaving points as a favor to their co-host applier. That's wild. That's wild. Um, the dealer is unnamed, okay. Um, he was identified as one of the largest dealers on the East Coast and was allegedly receiving um, inside player info. Okay, allegedly receiving inside player info not known to the general public from unnamed members of the Knicks. Okay, so at least once the dealer was informed ahead of time that a player was not going to play a particular game. Okay, um, so this is a excerpt from Brian Tuohy's book. Um, this is an excerpt from an FBI file that Brian Tuohy has in his book. Okay, it says some stated that to his knowledge, none of the players received any money for the tip, but simply do it as a courtesy to their dealer. One such tip was the Knicks versus the Bullets in New York about 2 weeks ago. Another game was Knicks versus Spurs last Tuesday, which was good. The type of tips are not regarding point shaving, but key players not playing. The latest tip was on the Knicks game, March 23rd, 1982, which was the only one that did not work out. Okay, so on February 28th, they lost to the Bullets 113 to 109. The Knicks did. And then on March 16th, they lost to the Spurs 114 to 91. Okay. And so throughout the 81-82 season, Brian Tuohy wrote in his book, the informant alleged members of the Knicks were betting against themselves. Here is another excerpt, FBI excerpt from Brian Tuohy's book. Source further stated that at this point, he believes that players must be betting against the Knicks to lose. There was a source, observed heavy betting that was redacted. That's what it says. Toward the latter part of the Knicks season, on the Knicks to lose certain games. In each case, the Knicks did lose or failed to cover the point spread on the game. Tuohy also wrote that despite the info and the investigation that went on for years, no charges were ever filed, lack of physical evidence, and confessions. Okay? Now, the New York Knicks, they ended up going 33 and 49 that season after going 50 and 32 the year before. Okay? They ended the season going 4-14, and they lost 8 of their last 9 games. Okay, And they asked Michael Ray Richardson about that. And Michael Ray Richardson was like, hell no. We never did anything like that. Okay. So, yeah. But I mentioned earlier that those Knicks teams of the early 80s up into the mid part of the 1980s were pretty wild. Okay. No, Butch Beard was on the head team. Butch Beard was on that team. Hold on. I think it was Butch Beard or Butch Carter. Butch Carter, yeah. Yeah, Butch Carter, who was an assistant coach and played for the Knicks. So between 1980 and 1987, they were some wild teams, okay? Um, one such incident, there was a shouting match that took place between Hall of Famer coach Huey Brown and Darrell Walker. They got into a shouting match during January of the 1986 season, okay? Then he staged a sit-in during a team workout in Atlanta. And Darrell Walker, what he did was he plopped down in the middle of the lane, forcing his teammates to shoot over him. Okay, that's how Darrell Walker did his sit-in. Okay, he sat in the lane and forced his teammates to shoot over him. Okay, so another another time there was an assistant coach who was having an extramarital affair with a woman who was living in Trent Tucker's apartment complex. Okay, and the players found out about it. The Knicks players found out about it, and they were mad because the Knicks players had been criticized for not showing professionalism that whole year. Okay, and now here is one of their coaches, right, having an extramarital affair that got out, that the public found out about, right? um, and so there was also bad basketball, but there was also key injuries to key players, right? Like take 1985 for instance. Marvin Webster out for the year. Chuck Robinson played only 2 games. Bill Cartwright out for the year. Bernard King played in 55 games. Then he had that knee injury in Kansas City versus the Kings that pretty much put him out of action in 1986 and most of 1987 too. Okay. So in 1986, of course, I mentioned Bernard King was out. Bill Cartwright played in only 2 games that season. Okay. Okay. And I remember Huey Brown saying it was a rough period in New York during the next two seasons because these guys never came back. Okay. So Marvin Webster, he never came back. Chuck Robinson, he never came back. Bernard King, he did come back, but he came back late in the season. He came back late in the 86-87 season, okay? Bill Cartwright actually came back in the 87 season too and played another year before he was traded for the Bulls for Charles Oakley, okay? So they asked Patrick Ewing about playing with Bernard King, and Patrick Ewing said, I never really played with Bernard King. He never really had the opportunity because when Bernard King came back late in the 1987 season, Patrick Ewing was actually injured. Okay, so he never really got the chance to play with Bernard King. But that would have been fun, though. It would have been fun, though, to see those two play here together. Bernard King and Patrick Ewing would have been fun. So they were last in defensive rebounding in 1987. The Knicks were, okay, and somehow rookie Muggsy Bogues, who played for the Bullets, he was grabbing more rebounds than Bill Cartwright. Okay, 5'3" Muggsy Bogues grabbing more rebounds than the 7'1" Bill Cartwright. Okay. Ken Bannister, okay, Um, Played 2 years for the Knicks, then went on to play a couple of years with the Clippers. Okay. Um, he once missed 10 straight free 10 straight free throws in a game. Um, and according to according to what I read, he grazed the lower corner of the backboard while shooting a free throw at Madison Square Garden. So he shot free throws like Shaq. Okay. And then finally, there was Kenny Walker. Okay. Drafted 5th overall, I believe, in 1986. Okay. And so Rick Pitino was the coach. Rick Pitino's first year as head coach. Okay. 1988. And so Kenny Walker's in practice, and he didn't know how to throw a pass without shuffling his pivot foot. Okay? So Rick Pitino stopped practice. Pitino showed him what he was doing wrong. Okay? But Kenny Walker continued to throw a pass, picking up his pivot foot. Okay? And so one of the Knicks assistant coaches walked over to another court to work with Kenny Walker to show him how to throw a pass without picking up his pivot foot. Okay? So, but between 1986 and 1990, which basically means they wasted the first half of Patrick Ewing's career. The Knicks pretty much wasted the first half of Patrick Ewing's career, just like the Rockets did with Hakeem. Okay? They went through 5 coaches and 3 general managers. Okay? 5 coaches and 3 general managers. Okay? And let's see. Patrick Ewing spent 15 years in New York. Okay? So he spent 15 years in New York. Here are the coaches he had during his time. Okay? Hubie Brown, Bob Hill, Rick Pitino, Stu Jackson, John McLeod. Okay? That was within his first couple of years, from 1986, from Ewing's rookie season, all the way up to 1991. Okay? Yeah. From 1986 on up to 1991, Hubie Brown, Bob Hill, Rick Pitino, Stu Jackson, John McLeod. 5 head coaches, okay? So, Pat Riley, which is the 6th, Don Nelson, the 7th, and finally Jeff Van Gundy, the 8th coach, okay? So Patrick Ewing, in his 15 years in New York, 8 head coaches. 8 head coaches, okay? 8 head coaches. And people talk about Michael Jordan's first couple of years. He had Stan Alback. Kevin Lockery, Stan Alback, Doug Collins, Phil Jackson, okay? People, we forget. The New York Knicks were switching coaches like crazy in the first half of Ewing's career, okay? So they basically sabotaged Ewing, the first half of Ewing's career. So people talk about Michael Jordan running through coaches. The New York Knicks. The New York Knicks. Hubie Brown, Bob Hill, Rick Pitino, Stu Jackson, and John McLeod. Okay. 1986 through 1991. 5 head coaches. And they called Michael Jordan the coach killer. I'm just saying. All right. Yeah, but yeah, that's what it was like to play for the Knicks. in the 1980s. The drug scandals, the bad basketball, the injuries. Yeah, it was a pretty wild time in New York. And eventually they found their footing. Eventually they found their footing. And I think they found their footing when Pat Riley came in. Okay, yeah. I think they finally were legit when Pat Riley came in. So, yeah. But those 80s Knicks, wild. Okay. All right, that's it, and that's all for Throwing It Back with Sean Farrell. I am out of here, and God bless you all.